animal and plant cell. You see, all organisms in this world are made up of cells. Cells are actually the smallest, very, very small fundamental unit of life. So every living thing in this world has cells that it is made up of. There are some living things that are made up of just one kind of cell. And those living things are known as unicellular organisms. Just one kind of cell. An example, we have bacteria and yeast. These are examples of unicellular organisms. Meanwhile, a living thing like me and animals like lions and co are made up of different million kind of cells, different types of cells. Living things that are made up of so many different kinds of cells are known as multicellular organisms. Actually, it's difficult for us to see cells with our naked eyes. It's very, very impossible, but with the help of microscopes, we can actually view cells. So we have different types of microscopes that can help us to view cells. One example of microscopes that are normally used in schools is the light microscope. So if you go to your schools, your laboratories, the kind of microscope you are likely to see is known as the light microscope. These microscopes are called light microscope because they use light. So there is a light attached to the microscope, or it uses natural light, so a mirror attached, and then it reflects light through the object that has to be viewed. And with attached lenses, the microscope is able to magnify, increase the size of this object you want to view by 1,500 times, like 1,500 times of the original size. Images that are formed using light microscope are known as photomicrographs. There is a different kind of microscope known as the electron microscope. You see, the light microscope can help us see the cells, plant cells and animal cells, but we cannot see the actual things found in the cell, the smaller things found in the cell using light microscope. So the type of microscope that helps us to see smaller details in the cell is known as the electron microscope. And images formed from electron microscope are known as electron micrograph. And with the help of electron microscope, we are able to see images about 500,000 times the actual size of the objects. So with the help of electron microscope, we are able to see those minute little details of the cell. Now let's take the time to look at the various organelles or parts of the cell. So we'll be looking at both plant cell and animal cell. We'll look at the parts. There are some parts of the cells that are common to both plant and animal. When we mention those parts, we'll actually talk about them. Let's start with the very first one, the cell membrane. The cell membrane. You see, the cell membrane is also known as a partially permeable membrane. Partially permeable. The word partially is the opposite of fully permeable. So partially permeable because the cell membrane allows only certain substances to pass through it. So there are some substances that are allowed to pass through, while others are prevented from passing through it. That is why the cell membrane is known as a partially permeable membrane. So if the cell membrane is partially permeable, meaning it allows certain substances in and prevents some from entering, there's no telling that one important function of the cell membrane is to protect the cell. It's protect the inner structure of the cell and separate the content of the cell from its surrounding. So it is very, very important. Cell membrane can be found in both plant and animal cells. But there's something that can be found in only plant cell and not in animal cell. It is also a wall. That is a cell wall. So cell wall acts more like also a barrier. So it also separates the cell from its surrounding, but not as the cell membrane does. Instead of the cell wall being partially permeable like the cell membrane, it doesn't do that. It is welcoming to every kind of substance. Every substance can fully enter and any substance can also live. So instead of calling it partially permeable, it is what? Fully permeable. It allows every substance in and every substance out. So you see why it is important to have the cell membrane coming after the cell wall. Because as the cell wall allows all substances in and out, the cell membrane says, you wait, you in, you out, you stop. So that is what the cell membrane does. One important function of cell wall to plant cells is that it prevents them from bursting. You see, plant cells are able to absorb a lot of water. So imagine plant cells keep absorbing a lot of water. Maybe it finds itself in a situation whereby a lot of water enters the cell. Without the cell wall, the cell will keep expanding to a state where it will burst. But because of the presence of a cell wall, which happens to be cellulose cell wall, it is so rigid and strong that it holds the cell in that firm state and prevents it from bursting. Now we've made our way through the cell wall, now into the cell membrane, then into the cell itself. What do we see? Now we are into the cytoplasm. You see, the cytoplasm is more like a soup-like structure or a jelly-like structure in which all the organelles are found. And inside this cytoplasm, there are a lot of chemical reactions that take place. Actually, the cytoplasm is 70% water and other dissolved substances in there. And remember, there are a lot of metabolic reactions that take place in the cytoplasm. So without the cytoplasm, where will the other organelles be found? It's something to think about. Now, the next organelle we'll talk about is the vacuole. You see, the vacuole is a fluid-filled space inside the cell which is surrounded by its own membrane. What that means is that the vacuole has its own membrane, just like the cell on its own has the cell membrane. Vacuoles also have their own membrane. In plant cells, vacuoles are very large. Meanwhile, in animal cells, vacuoles are tiny and numerous, and they are also known as vesicles in animal cells. Meanwhile, in plant cells, they are large and contain substances like sugars and other dissolved substances called cell sap. So vacuoles are so important to the entire health of an animal and plant cell. Next up, we have the nucleus of the cell. The nucleus is very important when it comes to the life activity of the cell because it contains the deoxyribonucleic acid. This is also known as the DNA of the cell. You see, the DNA and the information it contains help the cell know the kind of proteins to make. And the type of protein made influence the type of character we see in an individual. So the DNA found in the nucleus make the nucleus so important to the cell. Next up, we have a structure or an organelle that is so unique to only what? Plant cell. That is known as the chloroplast. You see, the chloroplast contains a pigment called the chlorophyll. The chlorophyll has the ability to absorb energy from the sun to use in photosynthesis. You see, because plant cells have chloroplast, that's why they are able to undertake photosynthesis. But sadly, humans do not have chloroplast, so we cannot photosynthesize. Yes, humans cannot photosynthesize because of the absence of what? Chloroplast. An important organelle in the cell when it comes to respiration is the mitochondria. You see, the mitochondria plays a very significant role in cellular respiration. Mitochondria, very important in cellular respiration. Since it is the site of cellular respiration, it is definitely the organelle that makes sure we have ATP in our system. That is adenosine triphosphate. And what is that? It is basically the energy currency of the cell. So our cell actually needs energy to function and to help us stay alive and remain healthy. But what kind of energy does it need? That is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And this energy is produced through a process called respiration. And as a result of respiration occurring in the mitochondria, we say mitochondria happens to be the powerhouse of the cell. Next up, we have the ribosome. We can compare the ribosome to the factories of the cell. Because of the presence of ribosomes, our cells are able to make protein. And this protein influences the kind of character that we see in living things. Remember we said the nucleus contains the DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and this DNA contains information for making a particular protein. Yes, that's very true. But the nucleus on its own cannot make these proteins. So it sends this information, and with the help of ribosome and different kinds of RNA, protein can be synthesized in a process called protein synthesis. So here are some of the organelles found in both plant and animal cells that are so important to the survival of these living things. Well, here's a question for you. Name the part of the cell which has each of these functions. You can write that in the comment section. The first one, which part of the cell is responsible for making proteins? Which part of the cell contains information about which protein to make? Which part of the cell is responsible for photosynthesis? And which part of the cell prevents the cell from bursting when it takes up too much water? Also, which part of the cell stores a solution of sugar and other solids? And which part of the cell controls what enters and leaves the cell? Leave a comment of the answer to these questions in the comment section. See you in our next lesson.